In the unforgiving dust of the American West, where fortunes were built on steel and rock, a man's worth was measured by the power he wielded. Harrison Carter, a railroad magnate whose name was whispered with fear and respect from Cheyenne to San Francisco, possessed more power than most kings. But all his gold couldn't buy a single joyful step for his crippled son. He came to the grimy saloon in Redemption Creek expecting nothing but whiskey and solitude. He was about to witness an act of kindness so small, so profound, it would shatter his hardened world and set in motion a chain of events involving secrets, blackmail, and a decision that could either build a new legacy or destroy them all. Stay with us to discover how one dance step changed everything. The town of Redemption Creek, Arizona, was aptly named, for it was a place people came to either find salvation or escape a past that needed forgiving. It was a raw, festering wound on the landscape, carved out of alkaline dust and stubborn ambition. The main street was a wide, rutted artery, perpetually choked with a fine beige powder that coated everything. The warped planks of the boardwalk, the sweating glass of the general store, and the souls of its inhabitants. Life here was a grind, a daily battle against the sun, the scarcity, and the gnawing loneliness of the frontier. For Clara Mae Thompson, that grind was measured in the number of whiskey glasses she polished and the weight of the heavy wooden trays she carried. A widow at 24, she moved with a quiet efficiency that belied the ache in her bones. Her world was the smoky, raucous confines of the Gilded Cage, the largest and loudest saloon in Redemption Creek. It was a place of boisterous laughter, desperate gambles, and the mournful whine of a lone fiddle trying to patch the broken pieces of men's hearts. Clara Mae had a face that was pretty in a way the desert was beautiful, not soft or delicate, but etched with a quiet resilience. Her auburn hair was perpetually escaping its tight bun in wisps that caught the golden lamplight, and her gray eyes held a depth of understanding that was rare in a place so focused on surface-level survival. She had buried her husband, a dreamer who chased a silver vein that was never there, and now she worked from sunup to long past sundown just to afford her small room at the boarding house and send a few dollars back to her ailing mother in Ohio. Most nights, the Gilded Cage was a predictable storm of cowboys, prospectors, and railroad men. But this particular week, a different energy had settled over the town. A private rail car, a magnificent beast of polished mahogany and gleaming brass, sat silent and imposing on the newly laid siding just beyond the depot. It belonged to Harrison Carter. The name Harrison Carter was a legend forged in the steel, finance, and ruthless negotiation. He was a titan of the railroad, a man who could draw a line on a map and, through sheer force of will and an ocean of capital, make a new city spring into existence. He was spoken of as a man who didn't have conversations, but issued edicts, a man whose gaze could freeze a deal or a man's blood. He had come to Redemption Creek not for its meager charms, but because it was a critical junction for his expanding Southwestern Pacific Railroad line. He didn't mix with the townsfolk. He took his meals in his private car and conducted his business through stern-faced men in city suits who scurried between the telegraph office and the rail siding. But on this third night, the oppressive silence of his opulent car became too much to bear. He walked into the Gilded Cage not for company, but for a change of scenery. With him was his son, Thomas. The boy was perhaps 10 years old, with his father's dark, serious eyes, but none of his imposing stature. Thomas Carter was frail, his left leg held rigid by a heavy leather and steel brace that ran from his hip to his ankle. A bout with polio in his infancy had left him permanently hobbled, a constant, visible reminder of the one thing Harrison Carter's immense power could not conquer. They took a secluded table in the back corner, a small island of quiet dignity in the sea of noise. Carter ordered a bottle of the best whiskey the Gilded Cage had, and a sarsaparilla for his son. Clara Mae served them, her movements deft and unobtrusive. She noted the father's severe, chiseled face, the lines of command etched around his eyes, and the way he surveyed the room as if it were a map of assets and liabilities. But her gaze lingered on the boy. Thomas sat silently, his small hands resting on the polished head of a cane beside his chair. He didn't speak, but his eyes drank everything in. He watched the card players, their faces tense in the lamplight. He watched the burly miners laughing, their voices booming. But most of all, his attention was fixed on the small cleared space in the middle of the room where a few couples were dancing a clumsy but joyous polka to the fiddler's tune. A pair of young lovers twirled past, the girl's laughter echoing like a silver bell. A wistful, profound longing bloomed on the boy's face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated yearning for a simple joy his body denied him. He unconsciously tapped the fingers of his right hand on the table, a silent rhythm that matched the music. His gaze locked on the dancer's moving feet. Harrison Carter saw it. He saw the flicker of hope in his son's eyes, immediately extinguished by the heavy reality of the steel brace. A muscle clenched in his jaw. He poured another whiskey, the amber liquid doing nothing to dull the familiar, sharp ache of his own powerlessness. He could buy this whole town, this whole territory, but he couldn't give his son the freedom of that simple twirling dance. Clara May, clearing a nearby table, saw it too. She didn't see the son of a millionaire. She saw a little boy, trapped behind a wall of circumstance, looking at a world he couldn't join. And in that moment, her tired feet and aching back were forgotten, replaced by a surge of empathy so powerful it felt like a physical force. The noise of the saloon faded away, and all she could see was that small, lonely boy in the corner. The gilded cage was reaching its nightly crescendo. The fiddler, a wiry old man named Jebediah, was coaxed into playing a faster reel. The air grew thick with the stomp of boots on the floorboards, the whoops of cowboys and the rising cloud of tobacco smoke. Men flush with either whiskey or luck grabbed serving girls or willing ladies for a spin, creating a chaotic, swirling vortex of energy in the center of the saloon. It was a raw and vital display of life, and from his shadowed corner, Thomas Carter watched it like a traveler staring at a mirage of water in a vast desert. Harrison Carter watched his son. Each glance Thomas sent toward the dancers was a fresh twist of a knife in his gut. He had hired the best doctors from Boston and London. He had commissioned artisans to build the lightest, most advanced braces. He had built a world of comfort and luxury around the boy, a fortress of wealth to protect him from hardship. Yet here in this grimy watering hole, he was reminded that his fortress had no defense against a child's simple, heartbreaking wish. He felt the familiar rage and frustration rise in him, emotions he channeled so effectively in the boardroom, but which left him utterly defeated in the face of his son's quiet sorrow. Clara May had finished her rounds, her tray now empty. She stood near the bar, ostensibly wiping the counter, but her attention was wholly captured by the father and son. She saw the boy's gaze, but she also saw the father's, the flicker of pain that crossed his ironclad features before being locked away again. Most people in Redemption Creek were transparent in their desires, for gold, for land, for a drink to forget the day. But the quiet agony in that corner was something deeper, something far more complex. She looked at Thomas again. He had leaned forward slightly, his good foot tapping almost imperceptibly under the table. His eyes were wide, not with envy, but with a kind of academic fascination, tracing the patterns of the dancer's feet as if memorizing a language he could never speak. Something shifted in Clara May. It wasn't a decision born of logic or strategy. It was an impulse, pure and simple, rising from the well of kindness that hadn't yet run dry despite the harshness of her life. She placed her rag on the counter, smoothed the front of her worn apron, and took a deep breath. Walking over to their table was like crossing a border into a foreign country. The air around them felt different, charged, heavy. Harrison Carter's eyes, cold as river stones, snapped to her as she approached. They were eyes that dismissed people, that calculated their worth in an instant, and usually found it wanting. He expected her to ask if they needed anything, a transaction he could complete with a coin. But she didn't look at him. Her gaze went directly to Thomas. She knelt down, a difficult act in her long, restrictive skirt, so that she was at eye level with the boy. The sudden scent of lavender soap and clean linen cut through the saloon's stale odor of beer and sweat. "You like the music, Thomas?" she asked softly. His name was a guess, overheard in a hushed word from father to son earlier. The boy started, surprised to be addressed directly. He glanced at his father, who remained silent, watching Clara with an unnerving, predatory stillness. Thomas gave a small, shy nod. "It's a fine reel," Clara May said, her voice a gentle murmur against the saloon's din. "My papa taught me to dance to it. He always said the secret isn't in your feet, but in your shoulders. You have to feel the sway." Thomas looked from her face to the dancers and back again, his brow furrowed in concentration. Clara May smiled, a genuine, unforced expression that seemed to momentarily light up their dark corner. "You know," she whispered, leaning in a little closer, "the most important part of any dance is the very first step. It's the one that leads all the others." She paused, her eyes holding his. "Would you do me the honor of leading me in the first step?" Thomas's eyes widened. He looked at his braced leg, a silent, stark objection. He looked at his father, expecting a sharp dismissal. But Harrison Carter said nothing. He was frozen, not by indecision, but by sheer, unadulterated shock. In his world, people approached him with carefully constructed proposals, with fear, with avarice. No one had ever approached his son with such simple, unvarnished grace. He was witnessing something so far outside his experience that he could only observe. Clara May seemed to understand the boy's hesitation. "We don't need to go out there," she said, gesturing to the boisterous crowd. "We can do it right here. Just one step. To lead." She held out her hand. It was not the soft, manicured hand of a lady of leisure. It was a working woman's hand, with calluses on the palm and a small, faded burn mark near the thumb, but it was offered with the steadiness and sincerity of a royal charter. Slowly, hesitantly, Thomas placed his small, soft hand into hers. "All right," Clara May said, her voice full of quiet encouragement. "Now on the next downbeat from the fiddle, you just shift your weight. Lead with your shoulder. That's all. I'll follow." Thomas focused, his face a mask of concentration. The fiddle wailed. The beat came down. With a visible effort, using his cane for support with his other hand, Thomas shifted his weight onto his good leg and leaned into the movement, pulling her hand just an inch forward. It wasn't a step. It was barely a sway. But it was a beginning. It was a lead. Clara May followed his minute movement, stepping forward a tiny fraction. "Perfect," she breathed, her smile radiant. "You see? You're a natural leader." For a fleeting second, the longing on Thomas's face was replaced by a look of stunned, brilliant pride. A small, tentative smile touched his lips. It was a fragile, miraculous thing. He had not just watched the dance. For one single beat of music, he had been a part of it. She squeezed his hand gently and then rose, her duty done. "Thank you for the dance, sir," she said with a little curtsy, treating him with the gravity of any other dance partner. She gave a polite nod to the still silent Harrison Carter and walked back to the bar, her heart pounding. Harrison Carter stared at the spot where she had knelt. He looked at his son, who was now looking at his own hand, the one Clara May had held, as if he had just discovered it could perform magic. The boy's smile, faint as it was the first genuine smile Carter had seen on his face in months. The magnate felt a crack appear in the cynical armor he had spent a lifetime building. This woman hadn't asked for money. She hadn't put on a show for his benefit. He had been watching her all evening, and her attention had been on the boy's longing, not on the father's wallet. She had offered his son a moment of dignity, a taste of normalcy that all of Carter's millions had been unable to purchase. The chaos of the saloon roared on, oblivious to the monumental shift that had just occurred in that quiet corner. Harrison Carter watched the waitress, Clara May Thompson, as she went back to her work, collecting empty glasses. He saw not a lowly servant, but a woman of extraordinary substance. And in that moment, a decision formed in his mind, as sharp and clear as a newly struck railroad spike. He was going to change her life, not just as a reward, but because for the first time in a very long time, he believed he had found someone who could genuinely change his son's. The following morning, the sun baked Redemption Creek with its usual indifference. Clara May was on her knees, scrubbing the saloon's sticky floorboards with a stiff bristled brush and a bucket of gray, lye-scented water. It was her least favorite chore, a punishing, back-breaking task that served as a daily reminder of her station in life. Her thoughts were on the previous night, on the small boy with the solemn eyes, The memory of his fleeting smile was a small, warm coal she held within herself against the morning's chill. She thought of it as just that, a memory, a brief moment of human connection in a life that offered few of them. She was so lost in her work that she didn't hear the saloon doors swing open, a rare occurrence at this early hour. The sharp, confident footsteps on the clean part of the floor made her look up. Harrison Carter stood there, silhouetted against the blinding morning light. He was dressed not in the rugged attire of the West, but in a perfectly tailored dark suit of Eastern wool that seemed to absorb the light and radiate authority. He held a black bowler hat in his hand. He looked utterly out of place, a hawk in a chicken coop. Behind him stood one of his grim-faced associates, holding a leather satchel. Clara May scrambled to her feet, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Her heart began to hammer against her ribs. Had she offended him? Was she about to be reprimanded for overstepping her bounds with his son? "Miss Thompson," he said. His voice was not loud, but it filled the empty saloon, a low baritone that was accustomed to absolute obedience. "Mr. Carter, sir," she stammered, her mind racing. I hope I caused no offense last night. With your boy, I only meant to—" He held up a hand, a gesture that instantly silenced her. "You caused no offense, Miss Thompson. Quite the contrary." He walked closer, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the damp wood. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze analytical, as if he were assessing a parcel of land for its potential. "I have a proposition for you." Clara May blinked, confused. "A proposition, sir?" "I have been observing you, not just last night. My men have been making inquiries since our arrival. You are a widow. You have no family here. You work 17 hours a day for a pittance to support a mother in Ohio. You are diligent, sober, and by all accounts honest." His recitation of her life's bleak details was so clinical, it made her skin crawl. It felt like he had stripped her bare, not with his eyes, but with his information. "What I witnessed last night," he continued, his tone shifting slightly, losing a fraction of its icy control, "was not diligence. It was insight. You saw not a cripple, but a boy. You offered him not pity, but dignity. That is a quality I cannot purchase, and it is a quality I find myself in desperate need of." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "My son Thomas is educated by tutors. He is cared for by physicians. He has everything he could ever need, except for a reason to look forward to his day. He is surrounded by employees, not companions. I believe you can be that companion." Clara May was speechless. The fumes from the lye soap must be making her lightheaded. "I am offering you a position," Carter stated plainly, "as a governess and companion to my son. You will be responsible for his non-academic needs. You will accompany him, talk with him, encourage him. You will, in essence, be tasked with bringing a measure of the simple grace you displayed last night into his life." He named a salary. The number was so staggering, so absurdly large, that Clara May felt a wave of dizziness. It was more than she could earn in 10 years of scrubbing floors and serving whiskey. It was enough to bring her mother out west, to buy her the best medical care, to secure a life she had never even dared to dream of. "You will live with us," he went on as if he were dictating the terms of a railroad merger, "in my private car for now and at my estate in San Francisco. All your needs will be provided for. You will want for nothing." Clara May's mind was a whirlwind of shock and disbelief. This couldn't be real. Men like Harrison Carter didn't make offers like this to women like her. There had to be a catch, a hidden clause, something sordid and unspoken beneath the surface. Her time in the gilded cage had taught her that nothing, especially from a powerful man, was ever freely given. "Sir," she said, her voice barely a whisper, I don't understand. I'm a waitress. I have no education to speak of. I'm not qualified to be a governess." "His tutors are for his education," Carter countered sharply. "You are for his spirit. Your qualifications are precisely what I saw last night. They cannot be taught in a finishing school." He gestured to his associate. "Mr. Davies will handle the legalities. A contract to ensure you are protected." A contract. It was all so formal, so final. She looked around the empty saloon, at the dirty glasses stacked on the bar, the upturned chairs, her bucket of grimy water. This was her life, a cycle of endless, thankless labor. He was offering her an escape she never thought possible, but the sheer scale of it was terrifying. To be swept into the orbit of a man like Harrison Carter, it was like being asked to ride a hurricane. As if sensing her hesitation, his expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice dropping a register. "My son smiled last night. A genuine, uncoached smile. I would move mountains to see it again. I am merely asking you to help me do so." The mention of Thomas, of his small, proud face, cut through her fear. This wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the boy. It was about the chance to make a real difference in a life that had touched hers. The town was already beginning to stir outside. She could hear the creak of a wagon, the call of a vendor. Soon, Big Jim O'Malley, the saloon's owner, would arrive, and she would be just another pair of hands to him. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Harrison Carter's intense gaze directly. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny spark of her late husband's foolish optimism ignited. Perhaps this wasn't a trap. Perhaps it was a chance. "Yes, Mr. Carter," she said, her voice clearer now, steadier. "I accept your offer." A flicker of something, relief, satisfaction, passed through Carter's eyes. "Excellent. Mr. Davies will settle your affairs here. Pack your things. We leave at dusk." He turned and strode out of the saloon, leaving Clara May standing in a puddle of dirty water, her world irrevocably and terrifyingly altered. The town of Redemption Creek had just lived up to its name. But as the whispers began to fly, she would soon learn that salvation and condemnation often walked hand in hand. Life aboard Harrison Carter's private rail car, the Perseus, was like stepping into another dimension. The interior was a symphony of dark polished mahogany, plush velvet upholstery, and gleaming brass fixtures. Crystal glasses chimed softly with the train's motion, and a uniformed steward served meals on fine china. It was a world away from the gritty reality of Redemption Creek, a rolling palace that sliced through the raw wilderness with imperious ease. For Clara May, the first few weeks were a disorienting dream. She was given a small but beautifully appointed cabin of her own, and a wardrobe of new, modest but well-made dresses that felt alien against her skin. She ate meals with Thomas in a dining compartment with windows that framed the passing landscape like moving paintings. Her role was undefined, and at first she felt adrift. But her instincts with Thomas proved to be as true as Carter had hoped. She didn't coddle him or treat him as an invalid. She spoke to him as an equal. They played checkers, and she didn't let him win. She read to him from dime novels about heroic cowboys and daring adventurers, her voice bringing the stories to life in a way his dry academic tutors never had. Most importantly, she listened. She learned that his silence was not one of sullenness, but of deep observation. He was intelligent and perceptive, with a dry wit that occasionally surfaced to her delight. She encouraged him to talk about the things he saw from the window, the shape of a mesa, the flight of an eagle, the hard lives of the people in the small towns they passed. She discovered he had a keen interest in engineering and mechanics, fascinated by the very locomotive that pulled them along. Slowly, miraculously, Thomas began to emerge from his shell. He would initiate conversations. He started sketching the things he saw in a leather-bound journal Clara had bought for him at a stop in Santa Fe. The faint, hesitant smile she had first seen in the gilded cage made more frequent appearances. Harrison Carter remained a distant, powerful presence. He was often closeted in his study at the end of the car, immersed in telegrams and blueprints, his mind charting the course of his commercial empire. Yet he observed everything. Clara would sometimes look up and find him watching her and Thomas from the doorway, his expression unreadable. He never praised her directly, but his approval was evident in the continued respect with which he treated her, and the way his own stern demeanor would soften whenever he looked at his son. Their journey ended in San Francisco, at Carter's palatial mansion on Nob Hill. The house was an intimidating fortress of stone and marble, staffed by servants who moved with silent, unnerving efficiency. Here the challenge for Clara grew. She was no longer in the contained, transient world of the train car. She was an anomaly in a rigid social hierarchy. More than a servant, but certainly not family. The housekeeper, a severe woman named Mrs. Albright, treated her with thinly veiled suspicion, her eyes cataloging Clara's simple manners and unrefined accent. The whispers started almost immediately. The staff, the tutors, the doctors who came to see Thomas, they all wondered about the plain-faced woman from a dusty saloon who had suddenly become the boy's constant companion. The story was too strange, too improbable. Tongues wagged with scandalous possibilities. Was she the magnate's secret mistress? An opportunist who had somehow tricked her way into his confidence? Clara felt the weight of their judgment, the sting of their silent condescension. She was an outsider, a common sparrow in a cage of peacocks. Her only anchor was Thomas. Their bond was her shield. With him, she could ignore the whispers and the cold stares. But there were other shadows, longer and darker than mere society gossip. A man from Redemption Creek had not forgotten the sudden departure of the quiet waitress and the railroad baron. Silas Sill Blackwood was a man who thrived in the murk. He owned the land on which the gilded cage was built, held the gambling debts of half the town's prospectors, and had his fingers in every dirty deal, from cattle rustling to land fraud. He saw Harrison Carter's arrival not as a boon, but as a threat to his small, grimy kingdom. A man like Carter brought with him law, order, and scrutiny, all things Blackwood abhorred. He had been watching Carter, looking for a weakness, a point of leverage. When Clara Mae Thompson was plucked from obscurity and installed in Carter's inner circle, Blackwood's predatory instincts went on high alert. It was too perfect. There had to be a story there, a vulnerability he could exploit. He paid a man in Redemption Creek to ask questions, to dig into the past of the quiet widow. And in the shallow grave of Clara Mae's history, Silas Blackwood found the leverage he was looking for. He discovered that her late husband, Daniel Thompson, wasn't just a failed silver prospector. He was a card sharp and a cheat, a man who had fled a much larger town after being caught marking cards. And most importantly, before his untimely death in a mine collapse, Daniel had accrued a massive unrecorded gambling debt, a debt owed to one man, Silas Blackwood. It was a debt of paper, signed with a dead man's name, legally worthless. But as a tool for blackmail, it was priceless. Blackwood traveled to San Francisco, a snake slithering from the desert to the garden. He found Clara Mae one afternoon as she was walking with Thomas in the mansion's manicured gardens. He stepped out from behind a hedge, a greasy smile on his face, his presence a foul stain on the pristine surroundings. "Clara Mae Thompson," he said, his voice a low, confident drawl. "We have some unfinished business to discuss, you and I. Business concerning your late, dishonest husband." Clara froze, her blood turning to ice. The shadows she had been trying to ignore had just taken on a terrifyingly real and menacing form. The past she thought she had buried in the Arizona dust had just come to claim its due. The sight of Silas Blackwood in the pristine Carter Gardens was so jarringly wrong it took Clara a moment to process. He was a creature of sawdust floors and stale cigar smoke, and he looked predatory and profane amidst the manicured rose bushes and bubbling fountains. Thomas, sensing the sudden tension, instinctively moved closer to her, his hand resting on his cane. "Mr. Blackwood," Clara said, her voice tight, "you're a long way from Redemption Creek. What do you want?" "Business calls," Blackwood purred, his eyes flicking from her to Thomas and back again, a calculating look on his face. He doffed his hat in a mockery of politeness. Perhaps the boy could go and inspect the petunias for a moment. This is a conversation for adults. Clara felt a surge of protective anger. "Thomas, why don't you go sit on the bench by the fountain? I'll be right there." Thomas hesitated, his eyes full of concern, but he obeyed, moving slowly toward the designated spot, though he kept his gaze fixed on them. Once the boy was out of earshot, Blackwood dropped all pretense of civility. "Your husband, Daniel," he began, his voice low and venomous. "He was a dreamer, wasn't he? Always chasing the next big score. Unfortunately, his skill at cards didn't match his ambition. Before he did the world a favor and got himself buried under a ton of rock, he managed to sign this." He produced a folded, grimy piece of paper from his coat pocket, an IOU for $2,000, signed with Daniel Thompson's familiar, looping signature. It was a fortune, an impossible sum. "He owed me," Blackwood stated flatly. And since he's not around to pay, that debt falls to his charming widow. Clara's stomach plunged. That's absurd. I have nothing. Daniel left me with nothing. Oh, I think you misunderstand. Blackwood sneered, his smile widening. You have everything. You have the ear of Harrison Carter, a man with secrets, a man with plans, big plans for the new railroad lines, for land purchases, for shipping contracts. Information, my dear Clara May, is worth far more than $2,000. The cold, ugly reality of his purpose crashed down on her. You want me to spy on him? She whispered, horrified. I prefer the term repay a debt, he corrected her smoothly. You listen. You pay attention to the documents on his desk, the telegrams he receives, the conversations he has. You find out what land he's buying before he buys it. You find out which shipping companies he's planning to partner with. You pass that information to me, and in return, this little piece of paper disappears, and no one, especially your high and mighty benefactor, ever needs to know that you are married to a common cheat and a fraud. The threat was clear. It wasn't just about the debt. It was about her reputation, her position, her entire new life. If Harrison Carter, a man who valued strength and integrity above all else, were to learn that her past was built on a foundation of lies and deceit, he would cast her out without a second thought. She would lose Thomas. She would lose the security she had just found. She would be back in the gutter, but this time with the shame of exposure following her. And if I refuse? She asked, her voice trembling. Blackwood's eyes turned hard as granite. Then I have a very interesting conversation with Mr. Carter myself. I'll tell him all about Daniel. I'll even suggest that maybe you were in on his little card-marking schemes. Who's he going to believe? A railroad tycoon? Or a girl he picked up out of a saloon? And then I'll take this IOU and I'll drag your name, and by association, the Carter name, through every newspaper in San Francisco. A man like him can't afford that kind of scandal. A woman involved with his son, tied to grifters and cheats. He'll throw you to the wolves just to be rid of the stench. She was trapped. Blackwood had built the perfect cage around her, using the bars of her own past. Every direction she turned led to ruin. To refuse was to be exposed and cast out. To comply was to betray the one man who had shown her kindness, and to betray the trust of the boy who had come to mean so much to her. I need time to think, she managed to say, her mind reeling. You have until the end of the week, Blackwood said, tucking the IOU back into his pocket. A man I know will be at the public market on Saturday by the fishmonger's stall. His name is Pike. You give him a note, or don't. The choice is yours. He gave her another oily smile, tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing back into the city's shadows as if he were made of them. Clara stood frozen for a long moment, the scent of roses suddenly cloying and funereal. She felt Thomas's eyes on her and forced herself to move, walking on legs that felt like lead over to the fountain. Who was that man, Clara? Thomas asked, his young face etched with worry. No one important, she lied, her voice hollow. Just a man from the past. But he was important. He was a poison that had just been injected into her new life, and she had no idea how to find the antidote. For the next few days, she lived in a fog of terror. Every interaction with Harrison Carter was fraught with guilt. When he spoke to her with civility, she felt like a fraud. When he looked at Thomas and his eyes would soften with that rare paternal pride, she felt like a traitor. She tried to listen, to glean the information Blackwood wanted. She'd see maps on Carter's desk, covered in lines and notes. She'd hear snippets of conversations about rights-of-way and tonnage agreements. Each piece of information felt like a hot coal in her mind, searing her conscience. The simple joy she had found in her work with Thomas was gone, replaced by a constant, sickening anxiety. Thomas noticed the change immediately. She was distracted during their reading lessons. Her laughter, once so easy, was now forced and brittle. Are you sad, Clara? He asked one evening as they played checkers, his directness a spear to her heart. Just a little tired is all, she said, avoiding his gaze. Is it because of that man in the garden? No, of course not, she lied again, moving a checker without thinking and immediately realizing it was a foolish move. He captured her piece, then two more. "You always tell me it's better to face a problem head-on than to let it surround you," he said quietly, quoting a piece of advice she had given him weeks ago. "That's how you win at checkers and at life." His innocent wisdom was more damning than any accusation. She was a hypocrite, teaching this boy lessons of honesty and courage while she herself was drowning in deceit and fear. The end of the week was approaching like an executioner's footfall. Saturday, the fishmonger's stall. She had to make a choice, and she knew, with a sickening certainty, that either path would lead to her own destruction. The days leading up to Saturday were a special kind of hell for Clara May. She felt like a ghost in the opulent mansion, going through the motions of her life while her spirit withered. The weight of Blackwood's threat pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. She found herself watching Harrison Carter, not for information to betray him, but studying the man himself. He was a creature of immense discipline. He rose before dawn, his study light a solitary beacon in the sleeping house. He worked with a relentless, focused energy, consuming telegrams and reports as if they were air. He was demanding of his staff, his standards impossibly high. But she also saw the cracks in his armor. She saw the way he would pause by Thomas's bedroom door late at night, just listening. She saw the flicker of pride in his eyes when Thomas correctly explained the function of a steam engine's driving rod. He was a hard man, a ruthless man, but his love for his son was the unshakable bedrock of his entire existence, and she was being forced to betray that. On Friday evening, the night before she was to meet Blackwood's contact, the strain became unbearable. She was helping Thomas with a puzzle at a large table in the library. Harrison Carter was at his desk on the other side of the room, ostensibly reading a freight manifest, but Clara could feel his occasional, penetrating glances. Her hands trembled as she tried to fit a puzzle piece into place. It wouldn't go. She pushed harder, her frustration mounting, until the cardboard bent in her fingers. "Clara, are you all right?" Thomas asked, his small voice cutting through her panicked haze. She looked up and saw not only Thomas staring at her with wide, worried eyes, but his father as well. Carter had put down his papers. His gaze was no longer casual. It was sharp, analytical, and deeply unsettling. He had been observing her for days, she realized. The subtle changes in her demeanor, her distraction, her forced smiles, nothing had escaped his notice. "I'm fine," she said, the words sounding hollow and false even to her own ears. Harrison Carter rose from his desk and walked over to their table. He was a tall man, and his shadow fell over them like a verdict. "Thomas," he said, his voice calm but firm, "Mrs. Albright has a new book for you in the parlor. Go and see it." It was a dismissal. Thomas looked from his father to Clara, clearly reluctant to leave her, but he knew better than to argue. He slowly gathered himself and walked out of the library, leaving Clara alone with the magnet. The silence he left behind was immense. Carter didn't speak. He simply stood there watching her, his dark eyes seeming to strip away every one of her defenses. He was not angry. He was something far more intimidating. He was patient. He was waiting for the truth he already knew she was hiding. Finally, she couldn't bear it any longer. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound of a spirit breaking. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, tears beginning to stream down her face. "Sorry for what, Miss Thompson?" he asked, his voice still unnervingly level. "For everything," she cried, the words tumbling out in a torrent of guilt and fear. "I've deceived you, my husband. He wasn't the man I told you he was. He was a cheat, a gambler. He died owing a terrible man a lot of money." She told him everything. About Silas Blackwood's appearance in the garden, the IOU, the demand that she spy on him, the threat of exposure, the meeting at the market the next day. She held nothing back, convinced that with every word she was sealing her own fate, destroying the only good thing that had ever happened to her. She expected him to erupt in rage, to call her a liar and a traitor, to have her thrown out into the street. When she finished, exhausted and weeping, she risked a glance at his face. The fury she expected wasn't there. Instead, his expression was one of cold, controlled calculation. He looked less like a man betrayed and more like a general processing new intelligence from the battlefield. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze distant. Then he looked directly at her, and his voice was as quiet and deadly as the click of a hammer being cocked. "This man, Blackwood, he threatened you. He threatened to use my son's attachment to you as a weapon against me." "Yes," she whispered, shrinking under his intensity. "And what information have you given him?" "Nothing," she said, shaking her head vehemently. "I couldn't. I tried to see, but I couldn't do it. I would rather you throw me out for the truth than stay here as a liar." That was the answer he had been waiting for. A long, slow breath escaped his lips. He walked to the window and stared out into the darkening San Francisco night, his hands clasped behind his back. "When I hired you, Miss Thompson," he said, his voice a low rumble, "I did so because I perceived in you a certain quality of character. I gambled that your integrity was as genuine as your kindness. Men like Silas Blackwood are parasites. They feed on fear and weakness. They see a good thing, and their only instinct is to corrupt it for their own gain." He turned back to face her. The coldness in his eyes had been replaced by a fire, a terrifying resolve she had only glimpsed before. "He made two mistakes. His first was underestimating you. His second was choosing my family as his target." He walked over to a small writing desk and scribbled a quick note. He handed it to her. "Tomorrow morning, you will go to the market. You will find Blackwood's man, and you will give him this." Clara looked down at the note. It contained a single cryptic sentence: "The Torrance Pass, midnight." "What is this?" she asked, confused. "It is bait," Carter said, his voice grim. "It refers to a fictitious land deal for a new railway spur. It's a worthless piece of information that will sound valuable enough to bring the rat out of his hole. Blackwood will believe you have complied. He will come to the Torrance Pass himself to verify it, and I will be waiting for him." He saw the fear in her eyes. "You will not be in danger," he assured her, "but your part in this is essential. I need him to believe he has won." She looked at him, at this powerful, formidable man who was not casting her out, but was instead planning to go to war for her. He wasn't saving her because he was a benevolent saint. He was defending his territory, and she, by her loyalty, had proven herself to be a part of it. He was protecting his son's happiness, and she was the keeper of that. "Why?" she asked, her voice full of awe and disbelief. "Why are you doing this?" Harrison Carter looked toward the door through which his son had departed. "Because, Miss Thompson, you taught my son how to lead a dance. You have proven to be honest when deceit would have been easier. And I do not abide parasites in my house or in my life. Now get some rest. Tomorrow we finish this." The Torrance Pass was a desolate cut in the earth, a place of jagged rocks and clinging coastal fog. Bathed in the cold light of a full moon, its shadows were deep and absolute. It was a fitting stage for an ending. Hidden amongst a cluster of boulders, Harrison Carter waited. He was not alone. With him were two grim, silent men, relics from his rougher days of railroad building when disputes were settled with raw grit. This was a battleground he understood, a return to a more fundamental conflict. The trap, baited with Clara's forced courage, had been set. Earlier that day, she had walked through the bustling city market, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She found Pike, a weasel-faced man with shifty eyes, and handed him the note containing the fictitious land deal. He had snatched it and vanished. Now Carter waited for the rat to emerge. The echo of hoofbeats finally broke the stillness. Two riders appeared, Silas Blackwood and Pike. They dismounted in a moonlit clearing, just as Carter had planned. "The Torrance Pass," Pike said, his voice full of greed. "He's buying the whole canyon for a new spur line. She came through, just like I said." Blackwood grunted, unfolding a map. "If this is true, we buy the land at the mouth of the pass before he does. We'll bleed him dry." As Blackwood hunched over the map, Carter stepped out from the shadows. "The map is a fiction, Blackwood," his voice boomed, cutting through the night. "And the land is worthless. Much like you." Both men spun around, hands flying toward their pistols. They froze as Carter's men emerged on either side, rifles held with deadly stillness. "Carter!" Blackwood snarled, his face a mask of shocked fury. "The girl told you. Miss Thompson is a woman of integrity," Carter stated, advancing slowly. "A concept you wouldn't understand. You tried to use my son's welfare as a weapon against me. This was a grave miscalculation. This is business, Blackwood spat. Her husband owed me money. Did he? Carter's voice was dangerously soft. My attorneys were busy today. They discovered your history of producing debts from dead men. They found your fraudulent land claims in Nevada and the outstanding warrant for assault in Colorado. You are not a businessman, Blackwood. You are a parasite, and you are finished. He nodded to one of his men. Pike, pale with terror, was swiftly disarmed and escorted away to face the U.S. Marshals. Blackwood was left alone, surrounded and defeated. What will you do? He stammered, his bravado gone. You can't kill me. No, Carter said, his voice cold. Death is too simple. I'm going to erase you. By morning, every bank you have a loan with will foreclose. Every partner you have will know of your warrant. The deed to the gilded cage will be in new, law-abiding hands. You will leave this city with nothing. If I ever hear of you bothering Miss Thompson again, I will ensure you spend your life in a federal prison. Am I understood? The absolute certainty in Carter's voice crushed him. Blackwood, utterly ruined, could only nod numbly. Get on your horse, Carter commanded. Ride east and do not stop. Blackwood scrambled onto his horse and fled into the darkness, a ghost banished from the world of the living. Carter returned to the Nob Hill mansion as the first light of dawn broke over the bay. He found Clara in the kitchen, a shawl clutched around her shoulders, her face pale from a sleepless night of worry. It's done, he said simply. You will not see him again. Relief washed over her so profoundly she felt her knees weaken. Thank you, she whispered. He gave a curt nod, but then hesitated, a rare sign of uncertainty. Clara, he said, using her first name for the first time, your coming to me with the truth required immense courage. He glanced around the opulent room, a symbol of his power. I've built an empire of steel, but it is a cold legacy. My son is my only true legacy. You have protected him. You have given him a happiness my money could not buy. He turned to face her fully, his gaze direct and clear. Your position as a governess is no longer sufficient. Your value is far greater. Sir, I don't understand. I am establishing a foundation, he announced, his voice filled with a new, resonant purpose. The Carter Foundation for Children's Health. It will fund hospitals and research for children like Thomas. It will require a director, someone with empathy, integrity, and a deep understanding of its mission. He held her gaze, and in his eyes, she saw not an employer, but a partner. I am offering the position to you, Clara. I will provide the funds and the influence. You will provide the heart. We will build a new line together, not of steel, but of hope. It is a permanent home and a permanent purpose. Tears filled Clara's eyes, not of sorrow or fear, but of overwhelming gratitude. He wasn't just giving her a reward, he was giving her a mission that validated the very core of her being. Her life of hardship was over, her past redeemed. It had all begun because she saw a lonely boy in a dusty saloon and had the simple kindness to invite him to take a single, leading step. In doing so, she had led them all, the boy, his powerful father, and herself, onto a path toward a brighter, more meaningful future than any of them had ever dared to imagine. And so the story of the waitress from Redemption Creek and the railroad baron doesn't end with a simple fairy tale wedding, but with the beginning of a powerful legacy. It's a testament to the fact that true wealth isn't measured in gold or miles of track, but in moments of genuine human connection. Clara Mae Thompson, through a single act of profound empathy, didn't just earn a reward, she forged a new destiny for herself and countless others. She proved that kindness is a currency that can purchase things even a billionaire's fortune cannot touch. Dignity, hope, and a reason to smile. If this story of unexpected fortune and the enduring power of a good heart moved you, please take a moment to click the like button. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that small actions can have life-altering consequences. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will inspire and captivate you. What did you think of Harrison Carter's final decision? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. Or